The badge reader flashed red while Nolan Pike still had one hand on the training room door. Behind the glass, 12 young operators stood in a neat row, wearing Harker Meridian's new Atlas combat frames, their graphite shells gleaming beneath white laboratory lights. Nolan had spent the morning teaching them how to move through smoke when electronics failed, how to count doorways with their fingertips, how to recognize panic in another man's breathing. Now 2 corporate security officers waited beside him with a gray plastic bin containing the contents of his desk. His framed photograph of Maisie lay face down beneath a chipped coffee mug and a coil of parachute cord. "The decision came from upstairs," one guard said quietly. He was a former infantry sergeant Nolan had hired 3 years earlier. The man's eyes remained fixed on the floor. "I'm sorry." Nolan looked through the glass at the trainees. Several had turned toward him. One removed his helmet, but Nolan gave him the smallest shake of his head. "Do not make this worse. Do not throw away your job for me." At 48, Nolan had learned that dignity was sometimes nothing more than deciding who would be allowed to see you bleed. He lifted the bin and followed the guards across the polished concrete floor of the Colorado Springs headquarters. His right shoulder ached beneath the weight, an old injury from a collapsed stairwell outside Kandahar, but he refused to shift the box to his other arm. The elevator carried them to the executive level, where the air smelled faintly of cedar, expensive coffee, and the lemon oil used on the conference tables. Adrienne Vale stood at the windows overlooking Pikes Peak, one hand resting on the back of her late father's leather chair. She was 34, precise in every movement, with dark hair pinned neatly at her neck, and a charcoal suit cut so cleanly it seemed designed to discourage conversation. 6 months earlier, after her father died of a stroke, she had inherited a defense company valued at nearly $4 billion and a board that reminded her daily that sentiment was a weakness. A screen on the wall displayed Nolan's medical data, training scores, and a red line marking his declining sprint speed. "You refuse to sign the Atlas Field Readiness Certificate," she said. "I refuse to certify a release system that jams when grit gets under the shoulder collar." Nolan set the bin on the table. "We tested that collar in the lab. Your lab has filtered air and polished floors. Soldiers work in mud, salt water, ash, sand, and blood." Adrienne faced him. Her expression did not change. "The engineers calculate a failure probability of less than 1 in 40,000. Then send one of the engineers inside it and drop him in a flooded ditch." The legal counsel at the far end of the table lowered his eyes. Adrienne touched the screen, bringing up another graph. "Your reaction time has slowed. Your knee requires periodic treatment. You are nearly twice the age of the average Atlas operator. This company is competing for a next-generation contract, and I cannot let its public image be tied to a man who represents the previous generation." Nolan looked at the red line, then at her. "Your father hired me because I knew what happened after the presentation ended. My father built this company in another era. Your father buried friends." Adrienne's mouth tightened. "Your employment is terminated for insubordination and failure to support an authorized product launch. Human Resources has approved 8 weeks of severance." "My daughter's insurance?" "Coverage ends Friday. You may continue it through Cobra." Nolan knew the number before she said it. $2,600 a month, not including the specialty medications Maisie needed to keep infection from settling in her damaged lungs. "You know I can't carry that." For the first time, Adrienne's gaze shifted away. It lasted less than a second. "I am responsible for 8,000 employees, Mr. Pike. I cannot make corporate decisions around one family." Nolan picked up the bin. "That's the trouble with numbers," he said. "They never have to go home and explain themselves to a child." Maisie was sitting cross-legged on the living room rug when Nolan returned to their rented duplex in Pueblo. A blue airway clearance vest wrapped around her narrow chest, inflating and deflating with a mechanical thrum that rattled the spoons in the kitchen drawer. At 10, she was small for her age, with serious gray eyes and a spray of freckles across her nose. Her science fair project covered most of the coffee table: cardboard mountains, wooden bridges, and a hand-painted rescue helicopter suspended from fishing line. She looked from the gray bin in his arms to the clock on the wall. "You brought your office home." Nolan placed the bin beside the couch and crouched in front of her. The vest squeezed her ribs again, making her voice tremble. "Does this mean you're finally cleaning your desk?" "It means I'm taking a little break from Harker Meridian." Maisie studied him with the unsettling patience children developed when illness made adults lie too often. "Did you quit?" "No." "Did they make you leave?" Nolan brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. The skin beneath his fingers felt warm, though not feverish. "They decided they wanted someone younger." Maisie frowned as if he had told her the company had replaced a wrench because it had turned too many bolts. "That's dumb. It's business. Business can still be dumb." A cough rose in her chest. Nolan helped her lean forward until it passed, one hand steady between her shoulder blades. On the kitchen counter sat an unopened envelope from the pharmacy and a notice from St. Catherine Children's Pulmonary Center. The new inhaled antibiotic had been approved for only 3 months, pending continued employer coverage. Without it, Maisie's infections would likely return. Without the vest, the nebulizer, the enzymes, and the regular hospital treatments, ordinary colds could become dangerous in days. Nolan had faced men with rifles, collapsing roofs, helicopter crashes, and mountain weather that killed without malice. Nothing frightened him like a child's shallow breathing at 2 in the morning. Maisie switched off the vest when the treatment cycle ended. "Mom would have said they were being idiots," she said. Nolan's gaze moved to the photograph on the mantel. Rebecca Pike had been gone 6 years, taken by a cerebral aneurysm on a Tuesday morning while packing Maisie's school lunch. Nolan still wore his wedding ring on a cord beneath his shirt because placing it in a drawer had felt too much like admitting the marriage was over. "Your mother said that about a lot of people." She was usually right. She'd also remind us not to panic before we had all the facts. He forced himself to smile. "So tonight we eat grilled cheese, finish this mountain, and figure out tomorrow in the morning." Maisie nodded, but when Nolan stood, she caught his hand. "Dad?" "Yeah, Bug? You're not old." He looked down at her fingers wrapped around 2 of his. "I appreciate your expert opinion. You're just used." Nolan laughed, despite himself. "That sounds worse. I mean used like a tool somebody trusts." She glanced toward the gray bin. "A new hammer looks nice, but Grandpa always picked the one with the worn handle." Nolan squeezed her hand. "Grilled cheese," he said, because if he tried to answer, she would hear his voice break. After Maisie fell asleep, Nolan sat at the kitchen table beneath a weak yellow light and laid out the facts. His checking account held enough for 1 month of rent, utilities, and the minimum payments on 3 medical cards. He could sell the truck, but then he could not reach the hospital in Denver when Maisie's lungs flared. He could take private security work, though most companies offered high-deductible insurance that treated specialty pulmonary care like an indulgence. He opened the Cobra packet and stared at the monthly premium until the figures blurred. Beside the envelope lay an old brass compass engraved with the words, "Keep the person in the mission." General Everett Vale had given it to Nolan after a rescue exercise in Wyoming, years before Everett became ill, and began leaving more decisions to executives who had never watched a training casualty turn blue. Nolan turned the compass over. The hinge was loose. He repaired it with the tip of Maisie's tiny screwdriver, then opened his laptop and searched the public procurement database. The Western Readiness Evaluation would begin in 4 days at Harker Meridian's Jornada Test Range in southern New Mexico. The event was not simply a company exhibition. It was the final comparative trial for a 9-year federal contract to supply Atlas frames to specialized rescue and recovery units. Nolan knew the evaluation document because he had helped write its earliest safety standards. He scrolled past the endurance tests, communications trials, and structural rescue scenarios until he found a clause few executives had ever cared about. Every powered system competing for adoption had to be measured against an unassisted human baseline led by a currently qualified field instructor. Harker Meridian had listed no baseline instructor. Instead, the company had requested a waiver, arguing that an unaugmented comparison was obsolete. The waiver was still pending. Nolan reached for his phone. Lieutenant General Ruth Calder answered on the fourth ring. Her voice sounded as if she had been awake for hours, though it was nearly midnight. Pike. Ma'am, Everett's funeral was the last time you called me. So either you've found religion, or something is on fire. Nolan explained the jammed release collar, the missing baseline, and his termination. He left out the fear in Maisie's face. Ruth Calder had served with Everett Vale and knew enough about Nolan's family that embellishment would have insulted them both. When he finished, the line remained silent. "Can you still pass the instructor standard?" she asked. "Yes." "That wasn't pride talking?" "No, ma'am." "The board will say you're a disgruntled former employee." "I am disgruntled." "At least you're honest." Papers moved on her end. "The government has authority to appoint an independent baseline operator if the contractor fails to provide one. I can put your name forward, but I will not protect you from the course. You fail. You fail publicly." Nolan looked down the hall toward Maisie's room. "Understood. And Nolan? Ma'am? Do not go there trying to punish Everett's daughter. She's under pressure, and pressure turns fear into arrogance faster than most people realize. I'm not going for her." "Then why are you going?" Nolan watched the compass needle settle. "Because the machine is unsafe. Because my daughter needs me to keep standing. And because those two things have become the same fight." The Jornada test range lay beyond an abandoned gypsum mine where the desert stretched white beneath the morning sun. Modular buildings, broken aircraft fuselages, collapsed concrete tunnels, and steel towers rose from the flats like the remains of several disasters gathered into one place. News crews occupied a fenced platform near the command center. Defense officials stood beneath canvas shade structures while engineers checked tablets and technicians sealed 10 Atlas operators into their powered frames. Nolan arrived in his rust-colored pickup wearing faded field trousers, a tan work shirt, and boots he had resoled twice. His gear filled one canvas pack: water, rope, trauma supplies, a compass, protective goggles, 2 carabiners, a headlamp, and the brass whistle Rebecca had once carried on family hikes. No body cooling system, no powered joints, no visor projecting maps across his eyes. At the security gate, a guard scanned Nolan's temporary federal credential twice before letting him through. Adrienne saw him from the command platform. She descended the stairs quickly, followed by her legal counsel and a silver-haired board member named Miles Fenwick. "You are trespassing," she said. Nolan handed her the appointment letter. General Calder selected the independent baseline. Adrienne read the first page, then looked toward Ruth, who stood 50 yards away speaking with procurement officers. "You went around me. The rule was already there. You were terminated for refusing to support this program. I was terminated for refusing to lie about it." Cameras had begun turning toward them. Adrienne lowered her voice. "What exactly do you expect to accomplish?" "A fair test. You expect to outperform 10 men in powered rescue frames? I expect to find out what happens when the day stops cooperating with your software." Miles Fenwick leaned toward Adrienne. "We can challenge the appointment." "And delay the evaluation?" Nolan asked. The government will not delay. They'll compare Atlas to another company's baseline team, and every camera here will report that Harker Meridian was afraid of a man with a bad knee. Adrian's eyes sharpened. You planned this. I read the contract. Behind them, laughter broke from the operator's staging area. Easton Shaw, the public face of the Atlas program, had removed his helmet. He was 26, broad-shouldered and handsome in the practiced way of a man accustomed to being photographed. A former collegiate decathlete, he had completed part of a special operations selection course before a disciplinary discharge ended his military career. Harker Meridian had turned him into a symbol of engineered readiness. That the baseline? Easton called. I thought they were sending a team. Nolan glanced at him. They did. The other operators laughed. Adrian folded the appointment letter. If you withdraw now, I will extend your insurance for 60 days. The offer struck Nolan harder than the insult. For one moment, he saw Maisie beneath hospital blankets, her thin wrist taped to an IV board. 60 days could mean another treatment cycle. 60 days could also mean signing away the only leverage he had. Put it in writing for life, he said. Full coverage for my daughter, no deductible, and I walk back to my truck. Adrian's face closed. That is not reasonable. Then neither is asking me to certify a machine that can trap someone inside. Ruth Calder approached, her desert uniform crisp despite the heat. She was 61, with close-cropped silver hair and the stillness of a person who never needed volume to command attention. The baseline appointment stands, she said. Mr. Pike will run every task under the same time limits and safety rules as the Atlas team. Adrian looked from Ruth to the cameras. Very well. Nolan lifted his pack. One more thing. You are in no position to negotiate. I'm not negotiating. I'm making a promise. If Atlas performs safely and your people beat me clean, I will sign a statement saying my concerns were wrong. The board member's eyebrows rose. Nolan continued, but if the release system fails, or if I complete the evaluation ahead of your top operator, I want my position restored with authority over field safety. I want lost pay, vested retirement, and permanent medical coverage for Maisie. Adrian stared at him for a long moment. You will not finish ahead of Easton. Then the promise costs you nothing. She extended her hand. Agreed. Nolan shook it. Her palm was cool. His was rough and warm. Nearby, the first warning siren began to sound. The opening task was not a race across an empty course. The evaluators called it a displacement problem. Each competitor had to move through 8 miles of broken desert terrain while transporting components of an emergency radio mast, then assemble the mast at a ridge station and transmit a coded message. The Atlas operators divided the steel sections among themselves, their powered hips and knees taking much of the load. Nolan had no team to share with. Under baseline rules, he received a lighter mast designed for one person, though his total pack weight still reached 72 pounds. Easton grinned as he locked his visor. Try not to wander into Mexico. Nolan tightened his shoulder straps. Keep your steps shorter when the ground turns white. Advice already? It's free until you need it. The horn sounded. The Atlas operators surged forward, actuator motors whispering beneath their armor. Nolan walked for the first minute. He counted his breaths, tested the pressure beneath each strap, and let the others disappear into the heat shimmer. Years earlier, a young medic had once asked how Nolan could move for 12 hours without appearing to hurry. He had answered that hurry was a debt. The body always collected it later, usually at the worst possible time. By mile 2, he had settled into a steady rhythm that looked unimpressive from the observation drones. His stride was short, his torso nearly still. He drank before he felt thirsty and adjusted his route to use the narrow shadows cast by limestone shelves. The Atlas team followed a navigation ribbon projected inside their visors. Their course ran straighter, but it carried them across a basin filled with pale alkaline dust. Each powered step drove a soft explosion around their boots. Easton remained in front, amused by the temperature display showing his core holding well below dangerous levels. Then one operator reported a ventilation alert. Another slapped at the intake beneath his arm. Dust had begun to cling to the electrostatic filters, reducing airflow through the back units. The frames compensated by increasing fan speed, which drew in more dust. Nolan saw the first operator kneeling beside a dry wash, helmet off, face flushed dark red. An evaluator's vehicle waited half a mile away. Stopping would cost Nolan time. He stopped anyway. "Can you stand?" The operator nodded too quickly. Nolan pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck, then poured water over a cloth and placed it beneath the man's arms. "My suit says I'm within tolerance." "Your suit is wrong." Nolan triggered the emergency beacon on the man's shoulder. "You're done." "I can keep going. That's not courage. That's heat injury talking." The operator looked at Nolan's weathered face and obeyed. When the medical vehicle arrived, Nolan shouldered his pack and resumed without explanation. Above the course, Miles Fenwick murmured that the baseline had sacrificed 7 minutes. Adrienne watched the medic strip open the failed Atlas ventilation panel. "Filter contamination," the engineer reported. "Still within projected parameters." Ruth Calder looked toward the screen. Projected for whom? The final climb to the ridge rose through a field of volcanic rock sharp enough to cut fabric. The Atlas frames had power, but their operators had followed the visor route at full speed and reached the slope with their legs already trembling. One actuator began overcorrecting on loose ground, forcing its wearer into awkward, lunging steps. Nolan reached the base in 7th place. He moved diagonally instead of straight upward, using the switchback route he had noticed on the topographic map. Easton, 60 yards above him, tried to force his frame directly through the steepest section. The powered boots dislodged stones that rolled beneath the competitors below. "Shaw," Nolan called. "Angle left." Easton looked back. "Worried I'll beat you?" "Worried you'll start an avalanche." Easton ignored him. 3 steps later, the slope broke loose beneath his right foot. He dropped to one knee as stones slid around him. His frame automatically stiffened to prevent a fall, locking his leg in an unstable position. Nolan climbed past 2 operators and reached him. "Manual release," Nolan said. "I know." Easton pulled the collar tab. Nothing happened. Fine white grit had packed beneath the housing. His expression changed, not yet to fear, but to the first honest doubt of the day. Nolan removed a narrow steel pick from his pack, cleared the slot, and struck the housing with the heel of his hand. The collar opened. The frame softened. "You just fixed the defect you claim will kill us," Easton said. "Today you had someone standing beside you who knew where to hit." Nolan continued upward. He reached the ridge third, while the Atlas operators used an assembly overlay that placed glowing outlines across their vision. Nolan spread the mast pieces on the ground and let his hands work from memory. Wind strengthened across the ridge, bending the unfinished antenna. One Atlas operator followed his overlay without anchoring the base deeply enough. The mast toppled and nearly struck him. Easton adjusted after seeing Nolan bury his guy lines behind rocks. The final message came as a string of numbers delivered through burst static. Atlas visors transcribed it automatically. Nolan closed one ear with his finger, wrote the figures on his forearm, and transmitted them in reverse order as required. He finished second, 14 seconds behind Easton. The public scoreboard displayed the results beneath the Harker Meridian logo. The laughter from the starting area did not return. Adrienne met the recovery team near the ridge station. "The baseline received assistance time," she told the head evaluator. "He stopped for our operator." which is why the stopped clock was credited back, the evaluator said. Rescue protocol is part of the test. This is an equipment evaluation, not a morality play. Ruth Calder stepped beside her. Readiness without judgment is machinery. The government can buy machinery anywhere. The second event began after sunset in a mock town built from shipping containers and cinder block. The scenario described an earthquake following a chemical plant explosion. Competitors had to enter unstable structures, locate injured civilians, identify a leaking industrial tank, and evacuate survivors without causing a secondary collapse. Atlas helmets mapped walls through short-range sensors and assigned colored threat levels to each room. Nolan carried a chalk stick, wedges, a pry bar, and a paper floor plan intentionally printed with missing sections. Before the start, Maisie called from the hospital. Nolan stepped behind an equipment trailer so the cameras would not see his face soften. "Why are you there?" he asked. "Dr. Ortiz wanted cultures because I coughed up something gross." "You have a fever?" "A little one." In the background, he heard the familiar chime of a pulse oximeter alarm. Maisie lowered her voice. "Nurse Carla says you're on television." Nolan closed his eyes. He had meant to keep the evaluation from her, at least until he knew how it would end. "It's work." "They said you're competing against robots. Men wearing equipment." "Same thing, according to Uncle Ray." "Uncle Ray thinks an automatic garage door is a robot." Maisie giggled, then coughed. Nolan pressed his knuckles against his mouth until the sound stopped. "Dad, you don't have to win because of me." "I know. I mean it. Don't do something dumb." "That advice runs in the family. Promise." He looked toward the illuminated course where Easton stood encased in several $100,000 of armor. Beyond it waited Adrian, the contract, the health card, and every fear Nolan had tried not to carry into the desert. "I promise I'll come home," he said. It was not the promise she had asked for, and they both knew it. When the event began, Atlas performed beautifully for the first 4 minutes. Operators moved through the first structure with maps projected before their eyes. Their frames lifted concrete panels that would have taken Nolan time and leverage to shift. Then the evaluators activated electronic interference to simulate a damaged power grid. The projected walls flickered, wireless tags vanished, the Atlas teams slowed. One operator continued following a frozen doorway marker and walked directly into an unstable partition. Another trusted a green structural icon that had not updated after an aftershock charge, placing his shoulder beneath a beam already shifting under load. Nolan entered after them and did what he had taught recruits for years. He listened. Buildings spoke before they fell. Nails squealed. Dust whispered from stressed joints. Concrete made a faint granular sound when weight transferred across a crack. He marked safe routes with chalk and wedged doors so rescuers could retreat without searching for handles in smoke. In the third room, he found 2 mannequins representing trapped workers and a live role player portraying a supervisor with chemical burns. The Atlas visor identified the conscious supervisor as the evacuation priority because his vital signs were strongest. Nolan ignored the ranking. "Who else is inside?" he asked. The man pointed weakly toward a sealed maintenance closet. Nolan heard no voice, only 3 slow knocks. He pried the door open and found a teenager playing an unconscious apprentice. A tag beneath the boy's shirt indicated airway obstruction. Nolan cleared it, fitted a mask, and carried him out before returning for the supervisor. The evaluator watching from above wrote something on his clipboard and did not look up for a long time. Adrienne stood in the command trailer as Atlas performance data filled the screens. The program still led in total lifting capacity and average movement speed, but the human baseline had made no safety errors. Easton had already accumulated 2 judgment penalties. "Increase environmental complexity," Adrienne said. Priya Desai, the chief systems engineer, turned from her console. "The approved sequence is already running. Add mobile obstructions to Pike's final structure." Only his? The baseline is supposed to establish limits. We need to find them. Priya studied her. She had worked for Everett Vale for 12 years and possessed the quiet confidence of someone who knew where every technical body was buried. The evaluators will see the changelog, then classify it as an adaptive stress response. Adrienne, he was right about the collar. The collar passed inspection, after he cleared it with a steel pick. Adrienne's voice hardened. My father spent 30 years building Harker Meridian. We are 4 weeks from a debt restructuring the board has not made public. If this contract fails, we close 2 plants and lay off nearly 3,000 people. Nolan Pike gets to stand outside the numbers and call them heartless because he has never had to carry all of them. Priya looked toward the screen showing Nolan crawling beneath a tilted slab. He is carrying one number. Her name is Maisie. Adrienne flinched. Run the adaptive sequence. Priya did not move. That is an executive order. After several seconds, Priya entered the command. Inside the structure, hydraulic rams shifted a wall 30 seconds earlier than scheduled. Nolan heard the first bolt snap and threw himself across the teenage role player. The partition struck his shoulder and drove him to the floor. He kept one arm over the boy's head until the wall settled against a steel brace. Evaluators stopped the event. Medics rushed in. Nolan emerged with blood soaking the sleeve of his work shirt where a metal edge had opened the skin above his elbow. Ruth Calder walked directly into the command trailer. Who advanced the collapse? No one answered. Priya's hands remained on the console. Adrienne looked at the cameras, the board members, and the federal officers waiting behind Ruth. The system adapts to competitor performance. Ruth stepped closer. Machines do not choose when to bend rules. People do. Nolan entered behind the medics, his arm bandaged. He set a bent hydraulic connector on the console. This actuator received a remote command. Adrienne met his gaze. You were not seriously injured. But that is not the standard. You agreed to the same difficulty as the Atlas team. Then give them the same wall. The room went silent. Easton stood in the doorway with his helmet beneath his arm. Sweat had darkened his undershirt. He's right, he said. Adrienne turned toward him. You are under contract to this company. So was he. Nolan expected anger in Easton's face. Instead, he saw embarrassment. The younger man looked toward the blood seeping through Nolan's bandage. You covered the kid before you covered yourself, Easton said. That was the task. No, the task was points. Nolan picked up his pack. That's why you're still confused. By midnight, only 5 Atlas operators remained medically cleared. The final evaluation would begin at 3 in the morning and continue until sunrise. Competitors rested beneath separate shelters while technicians replaced batteries, flushed cooling lines, and inspected powered joints. Nolan sat on an ammunition case with his boots off, taping 2 hot spots on his feet. His bad knee had swollen above the kneecap, and every pulse in his cut arm carried a small electric sting. Easton approached without his frame. Without armor, he looked younger and less certain. He held 2 cups of coffee. They said you drink it black. Nolan accepted one. They say a lot. Easton sat several feet away. For a while they watched technicians work beneath floodlights. I didn't wash out for insubordination, Easton said. Not exactly. Nolan waited. I froze during a water confidence drill. Had a regulator problem. Nothing catastrophic, but I panicked. Afterward, I blamed an instructor and threw a punch when he called me dangerous. Harker Meridian found me 6 months later. They said Atlas would remove the weaknesses people carry. Nolan sipped the coffee. It tasted burned. Did it? When the visor is working, I feel like the man I was supposed to be. And when it isn't? Easton looked toward the dark desert. I hear the water. Nolan knew that sound. Every veteran carried a room, a road, a night, or a voice that waited for silence. "Fear is not proof you are broken," he said. "It is an alarm. You learn which part is warning you and which part is lying." "That's something your old instructors taught?" "No, my daughter did." Easton gave a faint smile. "The girl on your photograph?" Nolan nodded. "She has spent half her life with machines helping her breathe. She respects them more than most engineers do, but she never mistakes them for lungs." A technician called Easton for final fitting. Before standing, he looked at Nolan's swollen knee. "Why didn't you take the 60 days of insurance?" "Because 60 days ends. You could lose everything out here." Nolan rotated the brass compass in his palm. "I was already losing it sitting at my kitchen table." Easton rose. "The final event is called Black Arroyo. You know what's in it?" "A storm tunnel, a vertical shaft, and a rescue sled. The forecast says rain in the mountains. It always rains somewhere else before the water reaches you." Easton stared at him. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No. It's supposed to make you pay attention." Black Arroyo began in a dry concrete spillway 2 miles from the main range. Each competitor had to descend through a maintenance shaft, navigate a network of storm channels, locate a weighted rescue mannequin, and bring it to an extraction gate. The Atlas frames were designed to carry the weight while their navigation systems mapped the tunnels. Nolan would rely on painted route markers, a compass, and his headlamp. The sky above the distant Sacramento Mountains flashed with silent lightning. Range meteorologists reported that the storm remained north of the watershed. Ruth Calder delayed the start for 15 minutes while safety officers reviewed drainage sensors. Adrian watched the contract officers checking their watches. "We have a fixed airspace window," she said. "If we postpone, the evaluation moves to next quarter." "Then it moves," Ruth replied. Adrian called the weather team directly. The sensors showed no water in the upper channels. Against Priya's recommendation, she authorized the event. The competitors entered at 3:20. Underground, the air smelled of wet minerals and rust. Nolan descended the ladder slowly, protecting his knee, then moved through a round tunnel just high enough to stand. Far ahead, Atlas footfalls echoed like machinery in a factory. Root arrows glowed on their visors. Nolan checked the current of air against his damp fingertips and marked each junction with chalk. At the first vertical drop, he rigged his rope before looking over the edge. Easton reached the bottom ahead of him, using powered grip assistance. "You planning to knit something?" Easton called. "Planning to climb back out." 20 minutes later, the warning came not from a radio, but from a cold breeze carrying the smell of desert rain. Nolan stopped at a junction. A thin ribbon of brown water wound along the floor around his boots. His radio crackled with interference. "Control baseline, water entering Sector 6. No answer. He tried again. Easton's voice came over the local channel. "My map says extraction is east." "Forget the map. Find elevation." "The gate is 1,200 yards. Nolan looked at the water, now covering the soles of his boots. "You do not have 1,200 yards. In the command trailer, drainage alarms began appearing, one after another. A flash flood had crossed an unmonitored service cut above the range, entering the tunnel network through a maintenance grate. Ruth ordered immediate evacuation. Priya transmitted the recall code. 4 Atlas operators turned toward the nearest vertical exits. Easton's frame, however, received conflicting navigation instructions after a software update attempted to reroute him around a blocked passage. His visor directed him deeper toward the extraction gate. "Shaw is moving south," Priya said. "Why?" She pulled up the change history. The adaptive routing package Adrian had approved during the previous event had remained active. It classified Nolan's warning as competitor-generated interference and weighted the original course map above the emergency recall. Priya's face drained of color. His system is rejecting the evacuation command. Adrian stepped toward the console. Override it. I am trying. On the screen, Easton's signal entered the lowest section of Black Arroyo. Nolan's marker turned after him. Water reached Nolan's calves before he saw Easton's helmet light. The younger man stood at a steel service gate, trying to force it open with the Atlas frame. The gate had been welded shut years earlier. Brown water surged around his thighs. "My visor says the exit is behind this," Easton shouted. "Your visor is reading an old construction plan." Nolan pointed upstream. "Move." Easton turned, but the right leg of his frame did not follow. A warning tone shrieked inside his helmet. "Actuator fault." "Manual release." Easton reached for the collar. The tab moved halfway and stopped. Grit from the ridge march remained packed inside the mechanism. Water climbed to his waist. Nolan waded toward him, fighting the current. "Hold still. It's locking." The Atlas frame stiffened around Easton as its safety program attempted to stabilize him. In open air, the feature would have prevented a fall. In moving water, it turned him into a post. Nolan drove his steel pick beneath the collar tab. The housing refused to open. A wall of water struck them, lifting Nolan from his feet and slamming him against the gate. His headlamp went dark. For several seconds, he heard only rushing water and Easton's breath rasping over the radio. Nolan found the gate chain, pulled himself upright, and switched on his backup light. Easton's face was visible through the visor, pale and rigid. "Go," Easton said. "The shaft is behind you." Nolan looped a rope around the gate. "Save your air. You promised your kid you'd go home." Nolan looked at him. "So did you. To somebody." Easton's eyes moved away. "My mother." "Then we both have appointments." Nolan wedged the pry bar beneath the collar and leaned his weight against it. Pain tore through his injured shoulder. The housing cracked but did not release. Water rose to Easton's chest. The frame's battery compartment flashed a red seal warning. Nolan remembered the engineering cutaway he had studied months earlier. Primary latch at the collar, secondary cable beneath the left shoulder plate, inaccessible unless the outer shell was removed. He unclipped his rescue knife and cut through the fabric gasket. "That voids the warranty," Easton said, his voice trembling. "Send them a complaint." Nolan drove the pry bar beneath the plate. The current pushed harder. Somewhere upstream, metal thundered through the tunnel. Easton heard it first. "Debris." Nolan looked toward the sound and saw a broken maintenance ladder tumbling end over end in the muddy water. He shoved Easton's helmet below the gate crossbar and flattened himself against the frame. The ladder struck Nolan's back, tearing the rope from his hands. White pain burst across his ribs. For a moment, he could not breathe. Then he felt Easton's gloved hand close around his shirt. "Nolan." "Still here." He found the secondary cable and pulled. Nothing happened. "It's seized." Easton's voice became quieter. "Listen to me. The frame has a flotation bladder behind the neck. Manual trigger inside the left chest panel." Nolan opened the panel. Water poured across exposed circuitry. "That will lift you?" "For maybe 30 seconds. "Enough." Nolan triggered the bladder. A collar inflated behind Easton's head, forcing his upper body toward the surface. Nolan cut the final restraint near the hip and pulled the secondary cable again. This time, the shoulder plate opened with a violent snap. The frame released one side of Easton's body, but the locked right leg remained attached. Nolan drew a breath, ducked beneath the water, and worked by touch. The current filled his ears with a continuous roar. His fingers found the emergency bolt above the knee. He turned it with the pry bar. Once, twice, then lost his grip. His chest began to burn. He pictured Maisie sitting on the rug with cardboard mountains around her, telling him an old tool was one somebody trusted. Nolan found the bolt again. On the fourth turn, the leg assembly separated. He surfaced gasping and dragged Easton free as the dead frame tipped sideways and vanished beneath the flood. The nearest maintenance shaft was more than 200 yards upstream. Nolan tied Easton into the rope and moved against the water one step at a time. Without the powered frame, Easton's right leg barely supported him. Twice he fell. Twice Nolan hauled him upright. The water reached Nolan's ribs, then his chest. Every breath sharpened the pain in his back. "Leave the rope," Easton said. "It's slowing you down. The rope is the reason you're still attached to me. You can't carry me through that." Ahead, the tunnel narrowed where a collapsed panel forced the water into a violent channel. Nolan studied the walls. Rusted utility brackets ran along the left side at shoulder height. "We are not going through it," he said. He clipped the rope to the brackets, moved Easton hand over hand, then followed. The brackets groaned but held. Above them, the flood slammed into the obstruction and exploded in sheets of muddy spray. When they reached the shaft, the lower ladder rungs had torn away. The remaining ladder began 8 feet above the water. Nolan built a foot loop from the rope and lifted Easton until the younger man could reach the first rung. "Climb!" Easton's injured leg shook violently. "I can't. You can be afraid or you can climb. You have time for one." Easton pulled himself upward. Nolan supported his boot until he reached the second rung. At the top, rescuers opened the hatch. Floodlights poured into the shaft. Easton climbed through first and collapsed onto the concrete. Nolan remained below. One hand on the ladder, his strength suddenly gone. Voices called his name. He tried to answer but could not pull enough air into his chest. Ruth Calder's face appeared above the opening. "Pike, give me your hand." Nolan reached. 3 rescuers hauled him into the rain. He rolled onto his back beneath a sky split by lightning. For several seconds, all he could hear was Maisie's airway vest in his memory. Steady, mechanical, relentless. Easton crawled toward him. "He came after me," he told the cameras and evaluators gathering near the shaft. "The recall failed. My frame locked. The collar jammed exactly where he said it would." Adrienne arrived in a range vehicle with Priya and 2 board members. Her hair had come loose in the wind. Mud streaked the hem of her trousers. Easton pushed himself upright. "Your update sent me deeper." Priya carried a tablet showing the software history. The adaptive system remained active after the urban event. It classified emergency instructions as conflicting data. Ruth looked at Adrienne. "Who authorized the adaptive package?" Adrienne's lips parted, but no answer came. Priya spoke before she could. "Ms. Vale." Rain struck the concrete between them. Ruth's expression did not change, which made her anger more frightening. "You altered a federal evaluation to disadvantage one participant, and the change nearly killed another. I did not know it would affect the recall." "You did not know because you were not testing safety. You were defending an outcome." Adrienne looked toward Nolan. A medic had cut open his shirt and was examining the bruising across his back. "I never intended—" Nolan winced as he sat up. "Intent is what people talk about after consequences arrive." Dawn found them inside the command center, where wet boots left dark tracks across the floor. The evaluation had been suspended. Federal officers copied software logs while Harker Meridian's board assembled through an emergency video call. Adrienne stood at the far end of the room, beneath a photograph of Everett Vale in his Marine uniform. For the first time since Nolan had known her, she looked less like an executive than a daughter who had discovered that inheritance included the damage a parent could no longer help repair. Ruth addressed the board without ceremony. The Atlas platform demonstrated useful lifting and load distribution capabilities. It also demonstrated unacceptable vulnerability to environmental contamination, software conflict, and manual release failure. The acquisition recommendation will be denied. Miles Fenwick removed his glasses. General, that decision could destroy this company. Then this company should have considered survival before presentation. Ruth turned to Priya. Is the frame salvageable? With a complete redesign, independent testing, and field authority above schedule pressure. How long? 18 months, perhaps 2 years? And who here has the credibility to lead that process? No one answered. Easton sat with his leg braced, a blanket over his shoulders. He looked at Nolan. One by one, others followed. Adrian's gaze remained on her father's photograph. There is something you should see, Priya said. She opened a secure archive and displayed a memorandum recorded 3 weeks before Everett Vale's death. Everett appeared thinner than Nolan remembered, seated in the same leather chair Adrian now used. His voice was uneven, but his eyes remained clear. Atlas will tempt people because it makes strength visible, he said. Visible strength sells. What cannot be displayed on a stage is judgment, restraint, and the willingness to turn back for someone else. Nolan Pike has frustrated every engineer in this company, including me. That is why his signature must remain mandatory on operational safety releases. If leadership ever removes him to protect a deadline, leadership has misunderstood what we build. The recording ended. Adrian looked at Priya. Why was I not shown this? You were, Priya said softly. It was included in the transition archive. Your office marked it reviewed. Adrian closed her eyes. Nolan remembered the stacks of reports after Everett's funeral, the board meetings, the investors demanding certainty from a woman grieving in public. Pressure did not excuse what she had done, but it explained the shape of the mistake. Ruth faced Nolan. The government will not purchase Atlas in its current form. We will, however, fund a smaller field development and rescue training contract if Harker Meridian establishes independent operational control. Miles leaned forward. Under whom? Nolan Pike. Adrian finally looked at him. Director of Field Safety and Readiness, Ruth continued. Authority to stop any test. Authority to reject any deployment. Direct reporting access to federal evaluators and the board. The contract will also require compensation for the retaliation that removed him. Nolan stood slowly. His ribs protested. My daughter's medical coverage. Miles began to speak about policy limits, but Adrienne raised her hand. Permanent, she said. Her voice was quiet. Premium coverage, no deductible, including specialty treatment regardless of your employment status. In writing. In writing. Back pay and pension credit. Yes. And the technicians who reported the problems keep their jobs. Adrienne glanced at Priya. Yes. Nolan studied her face. He had imagined this moment during the long drive south. In those imaginings, victory had felt sharp and satisfying. Standing there, he felt only tired. I don't want your chair, he said. I want you to understand why the person inside the machine matters more than the machine. Adrian's eyes filled, though no tears fell. I understand it now. Nolan shook his head. You understand what it cost. Understanding why takes longer. She accepted the correction without defending herself. Maisie was awake when Nolan entered her hospital room that evening. Rain tapped softly against the Denver windows, and the city lights shone in blurred colors through the glass. A clear oxygen tube rested beneath her nose. Her science fair helicopter sat on the bedside cabinet, delivered by Uncle Ray, along with 3 crooked paper stars. Nolan carried no trophy. He had brought the repaired brass compass and a new health insurance card sealed inside a plain envelope. Maisie looked at the bruising above his collar. You did something dumb. A few things. Did you win? Nolan pulled a chair beside the bed. The test stopped before anyone finished. That sounds like a no. It means somebody needed help more than I needed the finish line. Maisie considered this, then nodded as if the result met a standard she had not told him about. Was it one of the robot men? His name is Easton. Is he okay? He will be. Nolan handed her the envelope. She opened it and read her name on the card. What is this? It means your medicine is covered. Your treatments, too. Forever? As close as grown-ups are legally allowed to promise. Maisie ran her thumb over the raised letters. So you got your job back. A different one. Are you the boss? No? Good. Bosses have to wear uncomfortable shoes. Nolan laughed, then pressed a hand to his ribs. Maisie moved carefully to make room beside her. He sat on the edge of the bed, and she leaned against him, lighter than the pack he had carried across the ridge, and infinitely more precious. For a while they watched rain crawl down the window. Dad? Yeah, Bug? Did the new equipment save anybody? Nolan thought about the powered frames lifting concrete, the failed collar, the visor leading Easton into the flood, and the engineers who still believed the machine could become worthy of the people asked to trust it. Not yet, he said, but it might someday. After you fix it. After a lot of people fix it. Maisie turned the compass in her hands and read the engraving. Keep the person in the mission. That was Mr. Vale's rule. Did his daughter forget? Nolan looked toward the reflection of his tired face in the dark glass. For a while. Are you mad at her? Yes. Maisie waited. Are you going to stay mad? I don't know. She slipped the compass into his palm and closed his fingers around it. Mom said staying mad is like carrying a suitcase nobody asked you to bring. Nolan smiled. Your mother had an opinion for every occasion. She was usually right. He bent and kissed the top of Maisie's head. Outside, the storm moved east, leaving the hospital windows bright with reflected dawn. Months later, when Harker Meridian reopened Atlas testing under Nolan's authority, every engineer, executive, and operator began the first morning without armor. They learned to carry a stretcher by hand. They learned to navigate without a screen. They learned how quickly cold water stole strength and how difficult it was to free another person when fear narrowed the world. Easton returned after rehabilitation and became one of Nolan's instructors. Adrienne attended the sessions without cameras, sometimes standing in the back with mud on her boots, listening more than she spoke. The company survived, smaller and slower than its investors had wanted, but safer. On the wall beside the training floor, Nolan hung no photograph of himself. He placed only Everett Vale's brass rule in black letters, keep the person in the mission. Beneath it, the old gray access badge that had once flashed red was mounted in a plain wooden frame. Nolan passed it every morning without stopping. He had no need to prove that he belonged there. The people who had watched him walk into the flood already knew, and the daughter waiting at home had known long before any of them. Sometimes the bravest choice is to stand up for the invisible weight each human carries. Nolan Pike could have signed a form and kept quiet, but he chose integrity over convenience, and risked everything to prove that people's lives outrank corporate deadlines. His courage reminds us that technology, profits, and even public praise are worthless if they ask us to ignore the beating heart behind every statistic. True leadership listens for the shaky breath of the trainee in the smoke, the frightened pulse of a friend locked inside a steel frame, or the midnight cough of a child who simply needs her parent to keep fighting. When Nolan stepped into that flood to free a man the system had trapped, he proved that character isn't measured in quarterly reports. It's measured in the seconds you spend lifting someone else higher, even while the water rises around you. So next time life presses you to trade your values for comfort, remember Nolan's compass. Keep the person in the mission, and choose the harder right over the easier wrong. If this story moved you, drop a comment below telling us where you've seen integrity win the day. And don't forget to smash that subscribe button, then ring the bell, so you never miss another tale that puts humanity first.